Okay, so hello everyone. We are today here with Phyllis Tillin, and we're going to talk about self-management and self-management in coaching in particular. So Phyllis, I would start with what is to you self-management?
Well, hi, Marco. Thanks for interviewing me today. So self-management is a really important concept. It's part of the emotional intelligence competencies. And it really is, if you want to look at it from a psychological standpoint, it's the ability to self-regulate. So a lot of times people think it's like changing yourself or kind of doing something different, stopping your emotions from happening. But that's actually not a possibility for human beings. You know, we are kind of emotional machines. Just like we're cognitive machines, so we think a lot and we emote a lot. Whether we express them in different ways, but we all have emotions. So it's not about, and I'm just going to say what it's not about stopping your emotions, but it is about being able to regulate and be aware of what you're emotionally experiencing and regulate it so you can be kind of in the right place, and particularly with coaching, so you could be in the right place for your client as opposed to kind of coming in with your whole world. So in the emotional intelligence world, in the research that was done there, underneath this rubric of self-management was the issue of emotional self-control, which is really about self-regulation. What also comes under this is the ability to have a positive outlook. So that is emotionally regulated. So if you're in a negative emotional space, recognizing that and being able to realize, wait a second, this isn't forever. I can get out of this. The future might not look the way it is right now to me. Being able to have an achievement orientation. So being able to move your emotions in a way so that you're recognizing what the goal of your situation is. So when you're saying achievement orientation, part of that is knowing what's the goal of the situation and what's my goal? What do I want to accomplish here? So recognizing that rather than recognizing like, oh, you know, like whatever your upsetting story is or your exciting story is, right? Adaptability, being able to kind of be flexible, and also being able to take initiative and be transparent. So those are some of the things that are involved in self-management in the emotional intelligence model.
Wow, lots of
Yeah.
things, and I see a strong link also with self-awareness. So first of all, I am aware of my emotion, my thoughts, and then I learn to self-regulate them, which is not suppressing them. And why, in particular, do you feel self-management is important for a coach?
Yeah, I think it's critical because we all have big lives and big things that happen. And yet, when we're in a coaching mode, when we're in the coaching role, it's a couple of things that we're thinking about. One is we're there for the client. So that's basic, right? We're not there for ourselves. We're there to service the client. We're there to help that client and guide that client towards often actually it's bi-directional. So one of the things we're there for sometimes is to help the client regulate their own emotions, and the other is to help the client kind of move along to solve their own problems. Most of the business coaching I do is looking at how is the client going to be able to be the best leader they could be. How can the client do the job in the best way they can be? How can they be really effective? So so self-regulation is really important because we are not, we could come into that coaching session we come in with ourselves, and it's not just, there's a difference between coaching someone and just chatting, right? So a lot of times, you know, the typical thing is you dialogue with somebody, you go in at work and you're talking to somebody and you're just chatting, and sometimes everybody's venting their emotions, everybody's talking about what they're feeling or thinking in whatever way. But coaching has there's specific goals that we want to achieve, and we have to really pay attention to the client to help the client meet those needs.
Okay. Okay, so in order to help the client shift and reach what they want and the self-manage that they want to achieve, we have first ourselves to be in the best possible inner position to support them. So self-managing ourselves to help the client self-management themselves.
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay. But how do you manage your emotional state
Yeah.
when during a coaching session? So once, let's say I get into a coaching session and I am aware I'm stressed out about something, there's something that worries me in my life. I am maybe somebody just crashed my car and I come into a
Oh,
coaching meeting. Yeah, so
it does happen. Yeah, it does happen. Right.
yes, and I have to go there and be there for the client, but I
Oh.
still am aware of all the emotions that I bring in in the session. How do I manage that?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, one of the things you just said is really helpful, that you're aware of the emotions you're bringing into the session. And it's really interesting that you say that what you're saying, because in a pre-COVID world, actually, um, I often was driving to my clients, and often it was like there were incidents that would happen, or I'd be on the phone with a client or with another person or a person I work with, a coworker, and we're having a heated discussion because we disagree about something, or something happened and I'm not happy with it. And so one of the things that's really important is, before you walk into the session, is to really be able to prepare. And so there's a few things that I do. So I'm going to use the car example first. So one thing I do, like, so when I'm coming in and I'm just like in my car and I'm all in my own head. One of the things I do is I stop my car before I go in, and I sit for a few minutes and recognize that, okay, wait, I was there, but now I'm going to be paying attention to whoever it is, Kathy or Joe, or, whoever it is. Like, I need to, like, I almost try to, like, think about that person
Mhm.
and put them in my mind. And it's like I can't take the other piece out because it's in my body. I mean, the interesting thing about emotions is it impacts your body. So your body's like, so I have to pay attention to, like, my body's stressed. I'm not relaxed. So that's why I sit in my car. I love sometimes sitting in my car after I turn it off when it's silent. There's something about that for me. Everybody's different. There's something about that for me that's very meditative. Like, my body now relaxes. I'm not, like, behind the wheel. So there's a relaxation that happens. That's number one. So it's about relaxing. Two, focus on the client. Now, this doesn't have to take a long time. It takes, could take a minute, less. Paying attention to, I'm going to go in and I'm going to see Kathy now. I want to pay attention to Kathy's world, not Felice's world. I'm bringing Felice's world with me, but her world is what's important to me right now. And then I also use the time often right before I see a client I have to walk to the client, right? So I take in everything around me in the moment, rather than all of the things that happened on a phone call or in my mind. That, like, paying attention to the environment I'm in. And I guess different people are different. I tend to be a very inside my head too much. Like, some people are more outside too much. I'm inside too much. So what really helps me is to pay attention to the outside. It gets me out of my head. So it's like, oh, there's this person, there's that person, there's the security guard, there's the elevator, ooh, it smells like, popcorn in here, whatever it is. And I'm in that space until I meet with my client. So that really helps me in that very few moments before, when I'm in my own mind, or I've had some upsetting issues to come into the client.
Wow. Yeah. Wow, that's very powerful. So, first of all, find time to prepare.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Secondly, uh, pay attention to the outside world in order to uh, get out of your mind. And thirdly, focus on your client. And one thing that I learned is that you cannot focus on too many things at the same time. So if you learn to focus on someone, which in this case is the person you're going to coach, automatically the car accident, the other things will
mm-hmm.
lose power because they cannot be there because that space will be taken by something else. Is that also your
Yeah,
experience?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I will say that sometimes, and this could be opinion about some people, depending on the client, especially if I know the client, Sometimes I find it helpful to actually let the client know just a little bit if I'm not like, oh my gosh, that was such a hard car ride, or there was a lot of traffic. Not in a complaint way, but just so they know, like I put it out to them that I'm coming here and shifting. And then and then I asked them like, well, what was happening for you before we've been meeting? Like, so kind of like we could both shift a little. I don't always do that, but sometimes I find it helpful, not especially if it's something that's intense. For example, you really did have like a little car accident or something that's, you that may even interrupt the session, like, somebody has to call you because you just found out somebody is in the hospital, whatever that is. Sometimes putting that out on the table and giving the client a chance to do that helps me also. It's like now it's out in the open, it's transparent. We don't have to pretend.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, I want to highlight what you just said of putting it out, because I feel it applies to different situations of self-management, also during a session, and because it's a way to get it out of your system.
Exactly.
And putting it out can happen by saying it loud. In other cases, it can be writing it down. Like, let's say
Ah,
that I have a question that comes into my mind, and I realize that I'm thinking about the question. I'm not present and listening to the client. I write it down so I know I won't lose it, and then I can be again fully present.
oh, that's a great way of using your notes. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. But it's another way of putting it out. The other one is to say it, to say,
Mhm.
this is in my system. I want to share it. Once I share it,
Right.
it's easier to let it go, besides being transparent. So yeah, I think that's really powerful as well. Um, and going into the coaching session, so one thing is the self-management that happens before. So
Mhm.
I prepare for the session, and I am first aware of my state, and then I do something to be in a positive attitude, right?
Right.
Then then you have the session, and one of the things that happen in the session is the inner dialogue. So something is happening in our heads as coaches while we are coaching.
Right.
How do you manage that effectively?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of different things. One thing I did want to just go back to the preparation just for 1 minute.
Yeah.
One other really, because there's also the just preparation, even if you're not in like kind of a radical situation or a problem situation. One of the things I've learned over the years is to make sure I've left, if I can, a half hour, if not 15 minutes ahead of time to prepare for the session. Whether that means I'm reading my notes, I'm listening to music, I'm relaxing, I'm whatever it is I need to do, I'm taking care of my needs. Like, did I eat something? Did I drink something? Setting up, especially because a lot of my coaching now is on virtually. I find that that's just wanted to add that even in a regular situation, it's good not to go from one meeting to another, like without a break, or one coaching session to another. Sometimes I could mix up like which person I'm coaching and what their situations are. So you want to make sure you have some time to shift. So that was just one of the things I
Absolutely.
wanted to add. Um,
Absolutely.
so during the session,
Yeah.
I think that one thing that comes to mind that I've learned to use over time. And this has not been easy for me because, I've learned to be self-aware. I can't say that this is something that I came to coaching with, but over time, I've learned that when I'm feeling lots of emotion around a client, it is often good for me to say what I'm feeling. So, for example, sometimes I get a client, and this happens often, where they're telling me lots of stories and I'm getting lost in the story. Like I can't tell the forest for the trees. Sometimes I can't, and often I can't even understand everything they're saying in the story.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's not even that important for me to do that, right?
Mhm.
I'm listening to them and they're going on and on. And I find that being able to be aware, because what ends up happening for me, and this could be, I end up feeling very confused or lost or overwhelmed. It could be any of those feelings. I like to just be able to come out and say something to the client. And it's like an intervention. When I
Mhm.
say what I'm feeling, it then intervenes with the client. So if I say something like, and you've got to be polite, you know, you don't want to say like, you talk a lot. You talk too much. So, because, you know, a lot, and I'm just going to go back there, a lot of people, this is maybe the only person, you may be the only person they get a chance to share this with because it's confidential, right? So I want to give people space to do that, you know? I mean, I've had clients tell me like, I'll ask them, like, did you tell anybody else about this? And they're like, I didn't even tell my husband about it. Or I didn't even, you know what I mean? They didn't tell anybody. So you want to give them space, but sometimes it's not really useful for them even in the session. So I'll tell them, I'll say, you know, I'm feeling really lost in this story here. I'm not sure can you help me out here by like, what you're trying to get to here? And then they'll kind of step back, you know, and all of a sudden it clears up. Or I'll say something like, wow, this is a lot of information. I'm feeling overwhelmed by this. And it also helps the client. The client will somebody say, yeah, I'm overwhelmed too. And it's like, okay, so how can we work through this overwhelmness, you know?
Yeah.
So we're in it together, you know?
Yeah.
So not, you know, I think it's good not to put your emotions totally to the side. And that's about self-regulation, recognizing that it's there and then figuring out a way to regulate it.
Yeah, wow. You again shared a lot of interesting things. Well, one is that the coach doesn't necessarily always have to understand everything,
Right.
but which is also something that I tend to share because we are not here to give advice, so we don't to come up with a solution ourselves. So we we don't necessarily have to understand everything.
Right.
And the second is that we can provide honest feedback in the strict sense of it, which is like this is how your words land on me, and maybe it's useful for you to know. Like I'm overwhelmed, I'm lost, and sharing this is something that the client might not have the opportunity to have shared in their normal life because this is a safe space and the coach is there to support and can be honest with them by sharing the impact that certain things have. So I think that's also very powerful. Uh, one question comes to me, how do you recognize when it is something personal or when it is something relevant for the client? Personal to me, it can be like someone talks about, I don't know, a relationship with their wife, and because I have a bad relation with my wife, that triggers some emotions on me, but they are more my personal emotions. They're not something relevant for the client. While on the other end, there are certain emotions that can be relevant to the client. Then sharing I'm lost, I'm overwhelmed can be something useful for them. How do you tell the difference between them?
Yeah. And sometimes it's really hard. I think it's about level of the emotional kind of experience. So I'll give you an example that happens to me. Sometimes somebody will be talking to me about something that they're dealing with right now. You know, it could be a lot of the workplaces in the United States right now are experiencing a lot of conversations or confusions or kind of trying to solve the some of the stuff around inclusion in the workplace, inclusion and belonging, regardless whether it's gender, race, sexual orientation, or just, you know, age is another one, you know, people in different generations. And this is when I talk to leaders, I work mostly with people that are in, you know, levels where they can make decisions that can impact a lot of people. When they start talking to me about that, I have opinions, right? And I have feelings, right? And those feelings sometimes, like, they erupt so strong. When I feel something like my meter is going up really high, and it might not be anger, and it could be anger or joy, or I'm just being triggered, right? The trigger isn't positive or negative. It's just, sometimes my trigger is, I am just so interested in this. It's like, I want to do something about this. Like, this is like important stuff, right? When I feel that, that's my signal. It's like, okay, that's my signal. And in a way, it's like, breathe, and listen. I need to listen to what my client needs, because I have a very strong thing that I want the client to do it, or I want done. Like, it's like, I want this done, it's like, and everybody has their own, and I'm going to give there's other examples of this, but it's just that experience of like, I have to have this done. Like, there's some people, like for me, it's like if somebody is putting suitcases in my trunk of my car, we're going on a trip. If it's not all organized, it's like, take them all out. It's that experience, right?
Yeah, so more like a volcano erupting.
It's like a volcano. That's right.
Volcano erupting. While the other one is more subtle, the one we were saying before about getting lost, overwhelmed. It's not something that is like more, I can feel lost, but I'm not. It's not a volcano erupting.
It's a volcano, and the thing that's hard about a volcano is it's really hard to regulate. Yeah. Right. So all of a sudden, my emotions become harder to regulate. So number one, while I'm in a coaching session, this means like I have to be super aware. If I open my mouth up during the volcano, I have to still be super aware. It's like kind of like awareness comes first. Once I'm aware, I've got a volcano going up, and I will say that it's important to know which things trigger you. So having kind of a library of knowing, okay, they're going to start talking, as soon as they start talking about inclusion and engagement, I'm going to be triggered, right? I'm going to be like, the volcano's going to erupt. So knowing that as soon as they say it, I'm like, okay. And then it turns into that almost the same thing of like, for me, listening to my client and what is the goal that my client has? What is the role that my client has? And how can I help my client with this, right? I mean, that volcano often means that I have a lot of resources inside of me, right? I don't want to overwhelm my client with all the resources. I need to like kind of share those resources in a very targeted way for my client. So I can almost feel it right now. It's like, it's very hard to control it. But when I have success, and I don't always have success, but when I have success with it, I notice it's because I start to listen very carefully to my client. And one of the ways I do that is because I care about them. Mm-hmm. There's something there around the fact that I pay attention to the fact that I really care about my client and I want to do the best for them. That's why I'm having a volcano, because I really care. I care about them. I care about the situation. So sometimes just going with the volcano isn't the best thing. So that's,
Yeah. So again, breathing.
Yep.
And focusing back on listening and focusing on the care for our client. Mm-hmm. And that lets the volcano go down again. And we are back into a listening mode. Okay. Back to inner dialogue. How do you manage what can be going on in your mind, even when you're actively listening? And I'm thinking a question comes up. I have an idea and experience that can be valuable, and I start thinking about it. So it can be related to what is happening. It's not that I'm thinking about what I'm going to do tonight, but it is really related to the client. But it prevents me to be fully focused, fully present to what the client is saying. How do I get back into that space of presence and listening when my minds tend to wander?
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in how people do that. I mean, I don't think I have the magic bullet for that, I'll say. But I can say from my experience, I will say that using what I'm thinking as a resource, as opposed to using it as a solution. So there's a few things that happen. One is, again, turning my attention to my client, recognizing, is this thing I'm thinking here, how might this really help my client? And will sharing it help? Sometimes also being transparent really helps for me, where I'll say, when you said that, it made me think this. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And just seeing where it lands. Like, it made me think about this. and then just see, does the client just kind of move on? Like, well, that's nice that it made you feel that, but it has nothing to do with me. That's fine.
Hmm. Hmm.
Or more often than not, the client will say, oh, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Um, and I think it's a little different if I'm trying to solve, if I'm thinking of a solution.
Hmm.
Because sometimes what happens in that inner dialogue is I'm thinking about a solution. I'm thinking
Hmm.
about like, oh, I've had that experience and this is the way to solve it.
Hmm. Hmm. Right.
And I have to be very careful when that happens. I don't think I'm always that's always successful with it, but it is a matter of self-regulation.
Hmm. Hmm.
How do I share it? Do I share it? How do I make sure I'm not going off in my own mind and losing my connection with the client?
Hmm.
So again, it comes back to like really listening closely to the client. I think your technique of writing it down is sometimes really helpful with that. And sometimes I actually will say something like, I've been in that situation before, um, and I know how difficult it is. And then sometimes the client will ask me, well, what did you do in that situation? And it gives me an opening to say, well, this may not be helpful to you, but here's where what happened in that situation. So we have a dialogue about it.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I understand that can be delicate, especially when the client consider you as a coach as an authority and is eager
Yes.
to listen to whatever the coach says
Right,
and do
right,
it.
right.
Then it's very, very delicate. While
Yeah,
it's different when there is a more equal partnership that is being built, and
yeah,
then as a coach, you feel you can openly share something without influencing too much the coachee. I don't know if you know the difference, if you experience also the same
yeah,
with
yes.
clients that are more like, oh, tell me, I'm taking notes and doing anything you
No,
tell,
yeah,
and
yeah,
others
yeah,
that you can be more equal. And yeah, it is interesting how to self-management in order to create that
right.
partnership. Well, at the beginning, often it's not quite equal.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. I think you bring up a really good point. It depends on the relationship, and you have to be really careful about, especially when somebody's looking for advice. Not, it's almost like it's like a paradox, right? If they're looking for advice, that's a real, and they're trying to hook you into giving it. That's one kind of self-regulation, which is like, again, it's like, what does my client need here? My
Mhm.
client needs to be looking at themselves as a resource, not me. I am a resource, but not in that way. So that I need to help them kind of be resourceful for their own creativity inside themselves. Whereas there's other situations where sometimes clients really, they are resources for themselves, and maybe they could use a little bit of experience and context depending, that's helpful to them.
Yes.
And if I hold it back, like I had a client one time, I'll give you an example. I had a client one time that I'd worked with for like 2 or 3 years. And I always thought this client could use the Myers-Briggs. I don't know. It was like the particular assessment. I thought that would be a very helpful assessment for this client. But I just didn't want to guide them in that way. I felt like I don't want to just give them a bunch of assessments. And, I felt like let them kind of discover themselves what they need and tell me. And then the coaching stopped, and actually we still were kind of in a relationship of consulting, and I was working with some other people in his organization. And he called me up one time, I think it was like 3, 4, 5 years into our relationship. And he said, I just met with this consultant who gave me an MBTI. He gave me the Myers-Briggs. And he said, why didn't you ever do that with me? And I was like, oh, I didn't want to push it on you and everything. He said, oh my God, it would have helped me so much. So there is something to, I mean, it was really great feedback from him, but there is something to recognizing that when you have an instinct,
Yeah.
check it out. Worst case scenario, the person says, that's not helpful to me. Give it to people in a way where it's you have the relationships where they recognize that it's not a requirement, but it's a suggestion or a choice.
Yeah, which to me opens up another topic, which is how to listen to your own intuition and what
Mhm.
comes from a place of intuition rather than from a rational advice giving space. And in
Right.
that case, probably it was just intuition saying this is right for this person.
Yeah.
Yeah, very,
Mhm.
very, very interesting. I have another question, which is, are there situations that can occur when the coach realizes that he cannot self-management, cannot self-manage to the
Mhm.
point that he would, even withdraw from being a coach, like saying,
Right.
I
Right.
cannot coach this person
Yeah.
because I am self-aware that of something that I cannot manage,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
what that can be.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. I had so this is a typical, this is an unusual example actually, but I was working with a dean, right? And I was like a couple levels down from that dean in the university. And the dean asked me if I would coach them, particularly with the people that now coaching them would mean that I would have to be coaching them about my boss and my peers
Yeah.
and their boss. Now, coaching them about their boss was not going to be as hard for me because I was separated from that really in a bigger way. But I knew I was going to end up landing in that world and that I also knew, and this is really being clear about your judgment. I knew, number one, that I could benefit from coaching her, that I could benefit because I'd be able to, like, I'd know a lot of things that I wouldn't normally know. And I withdrew. I said, no, I can't coach you. And I recommended somebody else because I just knew I could not regulate that in myself.
Mhm.
Like I could not regulate my own self-interest there.
Mhm.
That's not because there's something wrong with me. It's not because I'm not a moral or ethical person. It's just because I was too close.
Yeah.
There are other situations where I've been in. I was actually in a situation with an associate dean a few years before that, who I coached, and it was much less of an issue for a bunch of kind of hierarchical reasons. Even though I technically reported to him, um, there was a lot more separation, and I had a lot more independence in my position at that time. I wasn't as connect, the way the structure was different, and it wasn't a problem. And we were able to manage that. The other thing I think that was different about that situation is that he was a psychologist.
Mhm.
So it was a lot easier for him to know the boundaries of the conversations, you know?
Yeah.
So, and he had been in the system for a long time, so he wasn't as interested in talking to me about other people as much as his own leadership. It was very clear that this was about his leadership in the culture that we were both aware of. The other situation was more around also her leadership, but also around learning the landscape. And I felt like, well, it's like the tree in the landscape telling you that you're a tree in the landscape. It's like, wasn't the right thing to do. So you have to be careful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would have a lot of more questions actually, Felice, but I don't know if we have time for them. But maybe I will ask you one more, which is around brain science and research that is behind this particular emotional intelligence competence, which is self-management, that you feel is relevant to know
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
coach.
yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot. I mean, I think if people are interested in brain science, it's great to kind of read a little bit about it. I think that the most important thing that's helped me understand this is to recognize that in a way my brain has a brain of its own. My mind has a mind of its own,
Well,
and that the science has shown us people that are, and I think it's revealing as we're moving forward. So in other words, like whatever I say now is going to change. The science is going to change and evolve over the next 5 or 10 years. But what I think is really important to know is that there does seem to be a system in our brain that works with the fight, flight, freeze syndrome. And that when we are triggered, and I'm using the word triggered, that could be we're triggered because we're excited and happy about something. We're triggered because we're afraid of something. We're triggered because it reminds us of something that is a negative experience, or reminds us of something that's very, very positive. Like either way that we're triggered. When we're triggered, our brain automatically does this thing where instead of going to the cognitive part of our brain, or the neocortex in the brain, to kind of logically and rationally solve a problem or think about a problem, it goes immediately to this limbic system in our brain. And a main part of that limbic system is the amygdala. And the amygdala gets, basically, we get triggered, our amygdala gets triggered, and then puts lots of energy in chemical terms in our body. So that's where we get maybe a little shaky. We get, whether it's excited on a positive or negative level, we get, our bodies start to get ready to fight, flight, or freeze, right? So our bodies are getting ready. It's as if, a lion's chasing us, or we have a surprise party and all of a sudden it's surprise, right? Our body gets triggered, and we've got a lot of cortisol running through our veins and blood system. Probably not using the right terms there. And we are now in not only an emotional state, but we're in a physical state that is keeping us from being able to be present. And in that state, it requires some technical kind of changes for yourself to manage. So one of them is some deep breathing. Time helps. Walking, running, listening to music, focusing. There are a lot of different things to do. And I think there's a lot of work in the mindfulness and presence area that could help with that. And I think we each need to find our own space. But I think it's important to recognize when that happens, it's not because you can't necessarily control it. I think that's why I really like that we talk about self-control, emotional self-control. I like calling it emotional self-regulation. So I'm aware of it, and then I do something that might regulate it. It's like a thermostat. I need to turn the thermostat down, And how do I turn that down?
Yeah. And listening to you, one thing that comes to me is that there is one thing that is something happens, and I learn, as you say, to turn it down or to self-regulate. But I find it, at least at the beginning, harder to do when there are emergency situations.
Yes.
If I didn't train myself to do it in milder situations.
Right.
So
right.
like make it a practice to have on a daily basis moments where I get awareness of my physical, emotional, mental state, and practice, as you say, that can be tons of ways and everyone can find their own to shift that state. Once I have practiced that enough, like doing fire drills, when there is no fire, the time where the fire will come, I will just go in an automatic mode because I've done it thousands of times and find my way. If I have done no fire drills, I will be just in panic running around during the fire.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that is really true. And I'm sure you have too, I've personally been in real emergency situations where that amygdala reaction is really helpful, actually, to kind of give you energy. But because you've practiced not being just in like a severe panic, you can kind of get your brain going and make sure you could actually be a resource to other people too in those emergency situations.
Is there anything that we didn't talk about, Felice, that you feel is important to share about self-management?
Not really. I do think that I just want to reiterate that I think this is I love the way you said that this is a practice. And that as a coach, it's something to practice. It's not something that you're gonna, you're not gonna get, you can get better at it, but it's not gonna, sometimes it might get you, and it gets you when it gets you. but I think it's kind of be kind to yourself, be kind to your client. If you are in a situation like this with your client, I think being transparent with your client is good about it. Like, oh my gosh, I'm really upset right now. I don't think I could do this coaching session. Or just canceling a coaching session when it's not the right time. I think that's really important that as you practice to recognize like, wow, this isn't really a good time for me to do this. I'm just going to cancel.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, I'm just going to postpone because, and that's been a hard lesson for me to learn actually. When is it that it's just kind of, you got caught up in traffic or there's some surprise that happened. And when is it that like, wait, and I will say there are certain situations where you should just know if you have somebody who's close to you that passes away, that's not a good time to have a coach. You might be able to, but you probably shouldn't. Yeah. If there's, radical things that are happening in your life at that, and it's in that moment, be very, very careful. It's better to just postpone. People don't mind, than it is to just kind of get in there and then find yourself in kind of a weird situation or
yeah. Well, that's again very powerful. And but back to the question we were saying before about when you cannot self-manage.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about when not to go into a coaching engagement or when not to go into a coaching session, because I realized that what happens is not something I can manage. And then, which is something recurrent that you said many times, be transparent with your client in the service of their own good.
Yes.
So I'm canceling the session, not because I don't feel I can provide the excellent service as a coach that I would want to provide to my client.
Yeah. I'll tell you one little story that I had with my client many years ago. This was in the beginning of my coaching career. So I hadn't been coaching very, very long. And I came in from a flight, I don't know, I think from Africa or something. And I came in the night before or that morning or whatever it was. I was in a different time zone. It was 3:00 in the afternoon here. And I think it was probably like 12 midnight wherever I had come from. And I go in to start my coaching session with my client. And I said, I just came in last night or whenever it was from Africa. And he looked at me and he said, I don't think we should have this session right now. I think you should go home and rest. And I was like, you're probably right. Thank you very much. So, I prefer my client not have to tell me. And that's something to think about. I was, it was definitely at the beginning of my career and we were in a good relationship with my client. I had a good relationship, but better that my client doesn't have to tell me like, wow, you don't seem to be in a good place to coach me.
Yes. Good example. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Felice. It was a great conversation and I'm sure we could continue, but maybe we will do a second part.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Marco. This was really wonderful. Thank you. I appreciate being interviewed.